Welcome to the Appalachian Wellness Connection. Join myself, Dr. Kevin Britt, and my good friend Dr. Micheal Bryan as we guide you through natural solutions for better health and lasting wellness. From chiropractic care to functional healing, we're connecting you to the best in holistic health from the heart of East Tennessee.
Welcome back to the Appalachian Wellness Connection. I'm Dr. Micheal. If you've struggled with chronic fatigue, hormone imbalance, digestive issues, or unexplained symptoms that traditional medicine couldn't address, this episode's for you. We're going to be breaking down how functional medicine works, the key markers we test for, and how our comprehensive approach helps restore health naturally.
All right, so when we're talking about functional medicine, we don't even really like that term functional medicine too much, but we're going to use it because that's what most people are familiar with. But one of the reasons we decided to go down this path in our office and with our patients is because we were helping a lot of people, but we kept finding these gaps, these areas where people kept asking the same questions or coming in with the same concerns, and they weren't getting the answers that they wanted. And so Dr. Mike and I were constantly researching and reading and listening and learning more and more and more. And we decided that we should start to implement a program that can actually help people with these things. And we decided that a functional medicine approach would be best. And one of the things that we decided to do was see what everyone else around us and online was doing. And one of the biggest problems we saw with the functional medicine world, and one of the biggest issues we heard from our patients, was that they noticed that a lot of the other functional med docs out there were practicing regular medicine but with more natural approaches. And so when we say functional medicine, you're going to hear a functional medicine doc say we get to the root cause of the problem. That's a very common thing, and we say it all the time because we truly believe that's what we do. But we've noticed that there's a lot of functional med docs that'll spend thousands on all the tests, blood tests, and every other kind of test you can imagine. And then they come up with a program for you, but their program is just a whole bunch of supplements and maybe some minor lifestyle modifications for you to do on your own. And they, instead of using pharmaceuticals, they're using herbs and supplements. And while we would both agree that in most cases that is probably better, it's still not getting to the root cause of the problem. It's still lowering things that are high on your lab test and increasing things that are low on your lab test using herbs and supplements, as opposed to figuring out why those issues are off and then fixing those. And so we decided to work with a functional medicine program that would be personalized to each individual person who comes in, and really be based as much as we can off the science and how we understand the human body at this current time. So we try to do as little guesswork as possible. We don't want to guess with anybody's health or with their approach, and so we have tried to put together the most simplified yet the most in-depth approach that we can do to figure out what the root cause of someone's problem is, and then individualize that care for them, because we know very well that no two patients are the same, and that we have to treat everyone in their own unique way, because people have different histories, different pasts, different genetics, different preferences, and everything in between. And so if we can't customize our program to them, they're not truly going to get well. And so we put together a functional medicine program that really, we believe, gets to the root cause of people's issues and helps them and teaches them how to remain healthy for the long haul, because we don't want to, every 6 months have to do more blood work or something and then switch your supplement regime up, because that's not really getting to the root cause. That's just covering things up with supplements instead of pharmaceuticals. And so that's why we decided to do this, and that's why we're doing this podcast on this issue, because most people don't really realize that there's such a vast difference between different practitioners, whether you're going to all the different ones in your local area or scouring the internet, because there's lots of them out there, and some of them are amazing and do amazing things, and some of them are treating functional medicine just like medical doctors treat, pharmaceutical conventional medicine.
So what is functional medicine? So the first thing I think we have to realize is medicine is a whole lot less personalized than what we really think it is. Generally speaking, it's not based on the person. The prescriptions are based on the symptom, right? And so you have two people that come in, same symptom, they get the same drug, right? And so the first difference is going to be in the personalization of it all, ultimately. And so our focus has got to be on the individual. And one of the things that you're going to hear us say repeatedly, probably more than any other word, is lifestyle modification or lifestyle improvements. And so if we think about, if we use an example such as someone, they are really stressed in their life, they eat fast food constantly, that fast food causes them to start gaining weight, that gaining weight and fast food causes them to have high blood pressure. Because they're having the high blood pressure, they start having some kidney issues, they start having anxiety and depression because they're taking more and more medication. We could look at those individual symptoms and say, all right, let's put them on some blood pressure medication, let's put them on some kidney medication, let's put them on Ozempic, so they lose all this weight and things like that. But what if we just got back to the source of it, is their fuel source, what they're putting into their body is garbage, and garbage in equals garbage out, right? And so we're going to focus a whole lot more on lifestyle components versus, just treating the symptom. And like Dr. Kevin talked about, as chiropractors, our philosophy is a lot different than medicine. And so we really struggle with putting functional, putting medicine in the word functional medicine, because really it comes down to a philosophical issue. We believe that health comes from the inside out, versus medicine is oftentimes an outside-in type approach. And so even with our spin on this functional medicine, it still has that philosophical DNA encoded into it, and so it's philosophically different. An analogy to this would be like the goldfish in water, and the water becomes dark. We could easily give them a supplement, give them a medication to handle that water, the toxic water better. But our approach is, let's just change the water. Let's just get the environment more conducive to the presence of health. We believe that the body is self-maintaining, self-adapting, and self-healing. So if we can change our environment, our body's going to be able to take care of itself. But in a bad, stressful, broken down environment, we can't expect to get the presence of health out of that. We're going to have more and more symptoms. And so, one of the differences, if we kind of look at this from a conversation, the conventional approach is, hey, I have a pill for that. The functional approach is going to be, hey, let's figure out why that's happening, and let's try to address that naturally. Oftentimes, using the natural approach, we're going to focus on more, supplements and things like that to begin with oftentimes, but it's really going to be followed by those lifestyle components. So lifestyle components is, basic, things like, are we consuming the right food? Are we drinking enough water? Are we putting poison into our body? Are we sleeping? Are we getting sunshine? These basic things that every single person, I've got a 4-year-old, and my 4-year-old can easily, tell you that water's probably better to drink than, coffee or, alcohol or things like that. It's not rocket science, these things that we're doing. We're going back to our foundation and saying, what does our body need to be healthy? And we're incorporating strategies to add more of that back into our life. And so really what it boils down to is lifestyle and ultimately philosophy. We believe that health comes from the inside out versus more of an outside in approach and just treating symptoms, but actually growing health versus trying to be less sick is a good way to kind of think about that.
Yeah, and so one of the questions that we get all the time is, well, how do you actually figure out what the root cause is? And like I mentioned earlier, there's a whole lot of ways to do that. And one of the most important ways is we just want to get to know you. We want to understand your history, what you do on a daily basis, what your habits are, or where you've come from, in the past, what you've tried, what you haven't tried, what you've done. That's going to give us a whole lot of information. In fact, for most people, we could create a plan just off of having a conversation with you and having you fill out some pretty in-depth paperwork. But what we do want to do is look under the hood. And one of the, considered the gold standard way to do that is to get blood work. The problem with blood work is we're just taking a snapshot of how you look at one point during the day. And what we know about the human body is that everything works in rhythms. Everything that you do works in rhythms. You have hormonal rhythms. Every one of your hormones doesn't go to a certain point and stay there forever. All of your different glands are working in rhythmic cycles depending on, is the sun out, is the sun down, what are you doing daily, how is your exercise routine, how's your stress levels. And so we wanted to figure out a way to not just take a snapshot at one point in time. And we realized that there's a lot of advancements in saliva testing, and so we use saliva testing over blood work because we can track multiple hormone levels throughout the day instead of just a single snapshot. And like I said, because of the advancements in science and understanding how to work with these things, we know that they're just as accurate as blood work. So we look for a couple key markers when we're doing saliva tests. The first one is called your diurnal cortisol. So diurnal means, what does it look like throughout the day? So we're taking multiple samples throughout the day because we know that cortisol should be highest in the morning because that's what wakes you up, and then progressively get lower as the day goes on. That's not the case for most people, especially if you are under chronic stress, which most of us are. And so one of the most important things we test for is that diurnal cortisol, see where it's out of rhythm. And then we need to put a plan together on how to get it back in rhythm and how to, for lack of a better word, train your body to keep it in that proper rhythm. And then we also look at DHEA, which is by some considered the master hormone for stress adaptation, things like aging and energy levels. And DHEA is actually, if you think of a seesaw, put cortisol on one side, DHEA is going to be on the other. They balance each other out. And so we want to see not only where your cortisol is, not only where your DHEA is, but where are they in comparison to each other. So then we're not just taking these individual readings, we're also seeing how they compare to each other, and that matters a lot too, and that helps us really hone in on how to help you get back on track. Another thing we look at is insulin. Insulin is huge. Most people have heard about it by now. It's, like many things, seems to be misunderstood. And because we're taking multiple samples, again, we're able to see what your insulin looks fasted and what it looks like challenged when we challenge it with things like carbohydrates. And so we can look at how your body's managing blood sugar and how your overall metabolic health is actually functioning during the day. And again, that helps us hone in on what exactly to do for you specifically. And then the other thing that we really check for is something called your secretory IgA. This is, think of it like the frontline defense of your immune system. And so we're looking at how your immune system's functioning. If it's really, really, really high, that could be indicative of some sort of gut infection, and then we'll take care of that some way. If it's really, really, really low, it shows us that your immune system's out of whack, and we have to get your immune system back on track. And since the secretory IgA is the front line of your immune system, it's actually, most people have heard, it's estimated that 80% of your immune system starts in your gut. Secretory IgA predominantly lives in your gut. And so this also gives us a really good insight on your overall gut health, because we know gut health matters a lot. Gut health, Dr. Mike said garbage in, garbage out earlier, and we try to keep things as simplified as possible, but it's not necessarily true. It's garbage in, or not you are what you eat, but it's you are what you assimilate. And so if your gut is out of whack and you have something like leaky gut, then you're going to be assimilating a lot more of that garbage that you eat, and then it's not just sitting in your gut, it's then getting into your blood system and then traveling throughout your body. So we need to see that. We need to see where you're at on those markers so that we can really customize a plan to get you back on track. And all of these things together, they're not just looking at not just looking at your hormone balance or imbalance. We're looking at how your body's handling stress and chronic stress. We're looking at adrenal function and adrenal fatigue. We're looking at metabolic dysfunction. We're looking at gut health imbalances, immune system imbalances. We're really getting a whole snapshot, or not even a snapshot, but a whole view of your day in life to customize a plan for you, rather than just throwing some sort of one-size-fits-all approach to you. And that helps us customize a plan that doesn't just involve supplements, doesn't just involve dietary changes, doesn't just involve lifestyle. It involves all of those things, and we can customize something perfectly for you. But one of the big things that we need to talk about is your diet.
Yeah, for sure. So before we get into diet, I think it's important, when we look at this podcast, I think one of the things that will be really important for those people that are very analytical, they're more that professor knowledge type, go back and listen to this portion of what Dr. Kevin just talked about, because these hormones and markers that we're looking at are really, really important. And what's really neat is how they collaborate, how they integrate, how they work in opposition a lot of times to each other, and understanding that balance or that rhythm is absolutely essential to get an accurate picture of what your body's doing every single day. One of the things that Dr. Kevin talked about was rhythm, and this is an absolutely essential phenomenon to understand. I mean, we see this in every aspect of life, right? And so, some of the things I was thinking about, if we take a step outside of the body and just look at rhythm, we see that the sun rises and the sun sets, right? There's light and then there's darkness. We see our heart contracts and then it relaxes. It contracts and it relaxes. And if we just really make this simple, our world would be so messed up if we didn't have that rhythm. I mean, just imagine if the sun didn't come up one day, or imagine if our heart didn't have the right rhythm to it, how much dysfunction and how much chaos would be in our life. And so these rhythms, want to go down, the spiritual route, so to speak, with this, I mean, maybe another podcast, but, God made the body and the world to work in an essential rhythm. And I think that's really important, to kind of look at. When we get out of that rhythm, oftentimes we find ourselves out of balance, and we see, maybe a lack of rhythm might be chaos, right? Those disruptions. And so another thing that he mentioned, and this is something that we hear all the time, is people come in and they say, man, my cortisol's through the roof. Or I had a test and it showed that my cortisol was high. And it's like, well, what does that really mean? To go back to what Dr. Kevin was talking about, did you have that cortisol test in the morning? Did you have that cortisol test in the evening? Because those two times, cortisol is going to be significantly higher in the morning versus in the evening. What does that look like fasted? What does that look like? Did you get a good night's sleep, the night before, right? There's so many things that stimulate cortisol, and there's so many overarching perspectives that we have to consider just looking at that cortisol. So when you look at it statically, we're oftentimes, leaving out a lot of essential information. And so that's why we feel like looking at it throughout the day and considering those things are extremely important to understand where you are in the process. And so if we dive into food as medicine, let's maybe look at an analogy here. If we just think of food as essentially energy that we're putting in, or maybe a substrate to make energy to run the show, we could look at maybe gasoline in a car engine. And so we know that if we put diesel into a gas engine, probably going to have some issues, right? And so if we understand that we have to put the right substrate into the body or into the machine for it to have an optimum function, we can then look and say, well, most of the food that people are eating is not nourishing their body. You could argue that maybe it's not food, maybe it's bioengineered substrates put together ultimately to make your brain excited and for you to crave more and more and more and more of these things at the end of the day. And so if we go back to that garbage in, garbage out analogy to understand food, we want to keep this really simple. It's important to realize that every single person that comes in, their diet is going to look a little different. That goes back to that biochemical individuality. What are we trying to work on with that person? And so, but there are some basic truths that we can apply as a blanket statement. And some of those things are processed foods have to go, right? Seed oils have to go. We look at processed food, and oftentimes what that is it's really, there's more chemicals in it than nutrients. Processed food, if you look at the back of the ingredient, I mean, you could have something that should have 2 or 3 ingredients, and this thing's going to have 10 or 15, different ingredients. A good general rule, if there's a name on there that you have to kind of sound it out, and it takes you, 12 syllables to kind of figure out, what this word is, probably not natural. It's probably not good to eat, kind of thing. And so, food really is designed to be medicine. Food is designed to nourish our body. We look at the vitamins, the minerals that are in healthy food. Our body has to have those things to run basic processes at the end of the day. And so we know that a lot of people are going to have immune system challenges. They're going to have inflammatory issues. Maybe they can't excite their immune system enough, or maybe it's overexcited and they can't calm that down, essentially. And so we can use food in a strategic way to kind of help with that. We're going to cut out a lot of inflammatory triggers as well. And so think about when you hear the term inflammatory triggers, oftentimes what that means is your body just doesn't really like that, or your body doesn't really do well with that. And oftentimes for people, some of the culprits that are well known are going to be gluten. For a lot of people, dairy, lectins for some people, and we'll get into that maybe, down the road, why we don't tolerate those things really well. But I think one of the things that's really important to realize with foods is that there's going to be some foods that are actually healthy. Let me explain it like this. We can take healthy food, but that might not be healthy to that person, or it might not be appropriate for that person. Like, we could look at vegetables, and I think a lot of people would say, oh, vegetables are healthy. But if our intestines and the gut microbiome and our digestive processes don't tolerate and break down those fibers the way that we should, that's going to be problematic for us. So just because a food is generally looked at as healthy, for some people, it might not necessarily be the healthiest option. And that's why we have to go back to really personalizing this aspect of care.
Yeah, and when everything that we do in this program, and I think we touched on this in the in the laser podcast, is we're trying to improve mitochondrial function, right? If you hear us say terms like metabolism, we're talking about how our mitochondria are functioning, and food is one of the most important things for that. And there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and we'll do another podcast really diving deeper into it and really breaking this down. But as Dr. Mike was saying, vegetables are typically healthy if you're healthy, and some people just aren't ready for them yet. So a lot of people who come in and have gut dysfunction and leaky gut and all these other things going on, vegetables are going to probably be bothersome to them, or certain other starches or things like, or certain foods will be very bothersome to them. And something we see is something like dairy. Some people love it, some people vilify it. A lot of people handle dairy just fine when they're metabolically healthy, but most people aren't metabolically healthy, and therefore they don't handle it well, and now it's getting vilified. When it's not actually the problem, it's that people aren't ready for it. And so it's finding out where you're at on that journey and helping essentially hold your hand to get you to the point where you're functioning properly and you can handle all of those things. And another aspect that comes into how healthy your mitochondria is over food is just your lifestyle. And Dr. Mike touched on that earlier, but it's really what we found to be the missing link that most docs, even a lot of functional medicine docs, don't touch on enough. They really dive deep into the supplements. Some of them will get into your diet, but most don't really dive into the lifestyle near as much. And that is often the most important part, because you could be eating really healthy and you could be taking all the right supplements, but if you're sitting down all day and not moving, and you're chronically looking at computer screens, TV screens, your phone screen, you're not up and moving, you're not sleeping well, you're not going to be healthy. It's really that simple. And we encounter quite a lot of those people as they come in. They go, well, this is my diet. And it's like, oh, it's actually not too bad. And this is, these are the supplements I'm taking. Like, okay, we might have a couple other things that we can tweak here or there to help that. And then you go, well, how do you exercise? And they go, well, I don't really exercise. Okay, well, what do you do all day? And I sit at a computer for work, and then I go home and I sit on the couch and watch TV, and then I lay in bed with my phone, and then I sleep for 5 hours, and I wake up to an alarm screaming at me, and I jump up and I do it all over again. You simply cannot be healthy in that situation. So when we break down lifestyle, we need to figure out where that is going for you. And one of the most important parts of that is stress management, because stress is what's going to cause all of our problems. Whether it's physical, chemical, or emotional stressors, that's what causes all of our problems. And it's figuring out what stresses we can take out of our life, like junky food and things like that. But it's also figuring out, certain stresses like our job. For some people, it's your family, or media, social media, all the different stuff. Those stresses aren't necessarily going anywhere. So how can we manage those stressors better? And how can we create daily habits around that, like sleep, breathing, prayer, movement? How can we add those things in as simply as possible, but to get the biggest benefits from them, so that you can manage those stress lifestyles? Because if your sleep cycle's off, if you're not exercising, and for some people they do exercise, but they actually exercise too much. They're exercising in the wrong way. They're creating more of a stress on somebody. A lot of people say, oh, I want to get healthy, I'm going to go train for a marathon. So, well, you're probably not ready for that, and most people don't realize that running a marathon actually is not a healthy thing. It's a giant stress on the body, and we're trying to take that stress off to allow your body to heal. Running a marathon can be a great goal to have, but we have to be healthy before we go and train and run that marathon, or else you're just going to create so many more problems for you. And I've seen that time and time and time again. And so it's figuring out where those lifestyle changes are missing for you and how we can improve them for you. And also because not everyone's lifestyles can be the same. It simply cannot. And so it's customizing, morning routines and evening routines to really maximize your body's energy throughout the day and your recovery at night while you sleep. That's what we have to focus on, and that really seems to be the missing link.
So let's talk about supplements real quick. So it's oftentimes said we can't out supplement a bad diet, and there's a lot of truth to that. If we just break down the word supplement, supplements are intended to supplement. They're designed to fill in the gaps. And so oftentimes what we see is supplements are trying to replace. And that's a major challenge, because supplements will never be able to replace the things that are absolutely essential. Our lifestyle components should make up the majority of our healing process, and those gaps should be filled in ultimately with supplements. So what are supplements there to do? Well, at the core, supplements are really there for things like deficiencies. They're there to help with balancing out rhythms. They're there to assist in the lifestyle components of that. So maybe what's an example of how we could use a supplement in the initial process? Well, early on in the process, if we look at habit formation, lifestyle has to be habit forming. We have to do lifestyle components every single day. We have to prioritize our sleep every day. We We have to prioritize exercise every single day, things like that. So let's look at maybe a hypothetical solution. Let's just say that you had a really busy day, you exercised, and one of the things, it was important for you to get some protein after that workout so you can build back those muscles and make them stronger. Well, if we don't have a lot of time one day and we don't want to necessarily cook that food, we don't have enough time, maybe we supplement with some protein powder, right? It's intended to kind of fill that gap. I had a time gap. I've got to use that supplement ultimately to fill that need. Another example, and probably even the most common reason that supplements should be used, is our food system is actually at its most nutrient depleted in all of human history. The reality of it is, if we go back to maybe farming practices, conventional, old school farming practices had an emphasis on regeneration. And regeneration is making the soil better and better every single year. So we would use things like compost, we would use things like animal manure, we would use all of these different things to supplement the soil to keep that soil ultimately healthy. What we do now, because it is a numbers game, is we generally, whatever crop we're growing, farmers conventionally add back what's called NPK. So that would be nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And so we add back three things versus we look at all the different minerals. We don't add back selenium. We don't add back magnesium. We don't add back boron. And so we could go on and on of these things that we don't add back. So if we're constantly taking and taking and taking from the soil, that food's not going to have it because it's not in the soil ultimately to get it from our food. And so depending on what we're eating, we may have to supplement, and even regionally. One of the simplest analogies to this is there's different parts of our country that are very well documented to not have certain nutrients in the soil. And look at the example of like iodine, for example, and that's kind of a polarizing topic a little bit, but just to hang with me here, let's just say that we need a certain amount of iodine to function. Well, places out in that Midwest may not have as much. We look at the goiter belt and things like that. They don't have as much iodine as somewhere, closer to the coast, right? And so in that example, someone may have to supplement with a little bit of iodine because naturally they're not getting it if they're eating a real natural diet because it doesn't come from natural sources. And that's, the thought process behind, iodizing the salt and things like that, ultimately supplementing for a known deficiency at the end of the day. Oftentimes we will use supplements in a way to assist in the lifestyle component before it's a habit as well. If we think about lifestyle is a really good reinforcement. So we reinforce our health with those lifestyle components, but if we don't have the presence of health, we might need to supplement, more in that beginning and get to a certain baseline, and then our lifestyle components are going to reinforce that aspect. And that kind of gets into supplements are not forever. Medications typically are forever, right? And so supplements are intended for a very specific purpose, and we typically don't see those supplements needed to be taken, constantly at the end of the day because we're using them how they're intended to use. Every person that comes in obviously is going to be personalized. And so the supplements that are right for one person is going to be a little bit different than the supplements for another person. We, base our approach on testing. And so based on the testing that we get, that's going to determine, a lot of what we supplement. There's no cookie cutter approaches when it comes to, building out the supplemental aspect of someone's, health restoring, functional med plan, if that makes sense.
And we kind of want to wrap up here with, we always try to add in patient success stories and things like that. And, one of the most common things we hear, no matter why someone's coming in, and one of the main reasons people do come in for something like functional medicine is chronic fatigue. Because if you're too tired to function throughout the day, then you can't get anything done, and that's just even more stress, and it creates just this awful positive feedback cycle. And so we have a lot of people that come in for that, and fatigue is one of the first things that goes away for people. So chronic fatigue and things like that are easy. We could tell you a bunch of different stories about that, but one story that came to mind is a woman who had nothing to do with chronic fatigue. She was having panic attacks, and most people don't think panic attacks. They don't think, oh, well, maybe I should change my diet or anything like that. They think I have to go talk to somebody or maybe take a psychotropic drug. But she didn't want to do any of that. She heard about what we were doing because she was already under care for chiropractic, and very quickly she, just like everybody else, she said she's sleeping better and things are improving. And then when I followed up with her about just a month in, I said, "How's everything going?" She goes, "I haven't had an episode in 2-3 weeks." So it happened very, very quickly that things changed for her, and she's continued to do better. She's not even done the program, and she's already beyond where she was hoping she would be. And so those are my favorite stories because they aren't even what you would typically think of why someone would come in to see us. We have a lot of people that come in for hormonal imbalances and perimenopause and postmenopause, like hot flashes and things like that women can't control. Chronic fatigue, like I said, is a big one. Gut issues, but no one would really think of, oh, maybe I need to see a functional medicine doc for panic attacks. And she travels a lot, so she'd be driving down the highway and she could feel it coming on. She'd have to pull over to the side of the road and sit on the side of the road for half an hour plus just before she could calm down to get back to work. And so this was really affecting her life, and just by really getting her life back in rhythm, changing some lifestyle issues, honing in on her diet, she's made leaps and bounds of improvements in just a few short weeks. And those are my favorite stories to tell.
Yeah, and so if we go back to what Dr. Kevin was talking about, it really goes back to our philosophy. And so when we go with a more traditional, conventional medicine approach, we go in with a specific ailment, we go in with a specific symptom, and the medical doctor is going to treat that symptom. And so the difference where we're not treating symptoms, we're ultimately helping people express health at a higher level. Oftentimes they may come in wanting to get, wanting to get assistance in their fatigue, and they notice those other things ultimately get better. And that's the majority of patients that we take care of. Oftentimes they may come in with one or two things, is what they tell us on paper. But then after, everything's said and done, they start listing the, on and on and on, things getting better. And that's because their body is getting healthier. And that's an exciting thing to see when your body is getting healthier. And so I want to speak to the people who really resonate with this podcast. What are the next steps? The first step in the process is we're going to have a conversation with you and see what's going on and to see if we can help. If we think we can help you, the next step is that we're going to order a test, essentially, and we'll walk you through what that process looks like and how to do that test. And there's a period of time we submit the test. There's a period of time that goes through the lab and we get the results. We get the results, we'll formulate a plan specifically to your needs, and then we'll go over and present that plan to you. And so it's actually really simple. All we do is start with a conversation, we start with a test, and then we go over whether we can help you or not. And so if you're looking for that, just let us know. You guys know where to reach us. You can reach out, social media, website, call the office, whatever's right for you. But if you feel, kind of like this nudging of, man, I think that might help me, I would encourage you to have that conversation, because we never know how far reaching something we may do, think, or say is going to affect the lives of every single person that we meet.